So, as I was telling you, in 1918, uh, the Germans launched this offensive into France, trying to take out, trying to knock the French out of a war, and it fails. Right? Uh, and here's where American troops really start seeing combat in for the first time, really, to be serious. Uh, at least ground troops in France. The the Germans are making advances with this offensive. The Allies, ask for help. Pershing at this point has some divisions that are combat ready. Like I said, the division is the integral unit an army is based out of. And he does put some of these divisions into the line to help plug holes. Okay? And so here's where the Americans really start to see some combat is in the spring of 1918 during this emergency. So the German offensive fails. Okay? Uh, they don't capture Paris. The Allies hold with some help from the Americans. And then in the summer of 1918, Pershing has his infrastructure put together to where he has his army ready for operations, the First American Army. So Pershing will ask for a task, something to kind of get everybody's feet wet. Okay? And so in the summer of 1918, June, July, don't ask me the exact date because I'm just pulling all this out of my head. But in the summer of 1918, the American army actually goes on the offensive. Okay? At a place near Saint Mihiel, which I'm probably mispronouncing because I don't speak French. Saint Michael would be the American version. English for spelling. And there's a salient in the lines there. Now, a salient is basically a bulge in a line. You have a line, but then there's like this wart sticks out, and so it's a weak spot in the lines. Okay? And so Pershing asked for the job of erasing this salient. Okay? And so the American army goes into combat and works on this for a while and gets that pulled off. Okay? So it's kind of like a trial run. Okay? Then by late summer, August going into September, now the First American Army is up and running. Okay? In fact, Pershing's organizing a second American army. The army's gotten big enough that it's going to outgrow the command structure. There's only so many men you can effectively control. So he's actually forming a second United States Army. But the First Army goes into action. They actually take up a section of the line in France, near a forested area near the Meuse River. It's usually referred to as the Meuse Argonne. Okay? And the Americans actually launch an offensive there at the Meuse Argonne in late summer, going into the early fall of 1918. At this point, the Germans are starting to run out of steam. Okay? Their spring offensive has failed. They now have an entire new ally to deal with. They'd gotten rid of Russia, but now they've got the Americans. And I've got the French, the Americans, and the British all breathing down their necks. Okay? So plus other smaller allied powers. And things were bad in Germany. The British, of course, had blockaded Germany all through the war. The civilians were starting to have food issues. They were eating. There was something called the turnip winter. They were so desperate they were eating a lot of turnips. Okay? The vegetable. The German Navy was starting to mutiny. The Navy had been bottled up in port for most of the war. Now, they had gone out a couple of times into the North Sea, but they would, of course, always run into the British fleet, and there would be an inconclusive engagement, and the Germans would eventually have to fall back. And there was talk of maybe sending them out again, and the German sailors were like, "What for? We'll go out and just get a bunch of us killed." And everything that's going on at home is the German communists. Okay, they're maybe emboldened by what's happened in Russia, where the Russian communists have overthrown the government, and the German communists are like going, "Well, maybe we can pull that off too." So the people are hungry. The Navy is irritable. The Army has failed in their offensive. and the communists are breathing on the neck of the government. And so the Germans decide this would be a good time to seek a ceasefire. Okay? They contact the Allies and say, look, let's talk. And we can use Mr. Wilson's 14 points as a basis, a starting point for negotiations. We're not saying we'll agree to all these, but there's something to start talking about. Okay? What the Germans are doing is seeking negotiations while they're still in a position of strength. Okay? They're still on French territory. They haven't been defeated, actually. I mean, they've had some setbacks here or there, but the French, the Americans, and the British haven't pushed them back into Germany. And so the logical time to seek negotiations is while you still have some bargaining chips to work with. Okay, and so the Germans ask for a ceasefire and to begin negotiations. And so this is known as an armistice. You'll see it on the outline there, armistice. Okay. So it's a ceasefire. It's not peace. It's not a surrender. It's just let's stop shooting and talk. Okay. And so the armistice goes into effect on November 11th, 1918 at 11 a.m. in the morning. Okay. So it's the 11th day of the 11th month at 11 a.m. So the 11th month, 11th day, 11th hour, the guns fall silent. The Western Front, as they called it, has been, there have been people shooting at each other since August of 1914. So like for 4 years there's been this state of war going on in France and Belgium. Mostly France. And the guns fall silent at 11 a.m. That's the cutoff time for the ceasefire. Because they have to send word out to everybody saying, this is what, we're stopping shooting. It's no good if you stop shooting before the other guy stops shooting. Make sure everybody gets the word. So they pick 11 a.m. Now you know what this means. Some poor schmuck stuck his head up at 10:59 a.m. and got his head blown off. That's just how it works. But 11 a.m. silence. Okay, all right, quiet. And we can see where we go from there. So November 11th becomes a big holiday. It's known as Armistice Day, okay, because it's when the fighting stopped in World War I for all practical purposes. Nowadays, November 11th, of course, is known as what? Veterans Day. Okay, that's why Veterans Day is November 11th. Originally it was Armistice Day. That's what they called it. But then, eventually what happens is other wars roll around and you go, well, gosh darn, we can't really have a holiday for every time a war ends. We never get any work done. So Armistice Day becomes Veterans Day at a later date. Okay? That's why it's November 11th. Okay? And there's a slide here. Let me see if I can get the picture to change. So here's the cheering troops heading for France. They're very excited to be going. Here they are celebrating the armistice. Okay, turns out war is dangerous. You can get killed. The food isn't very good. You're living in a trench, and so everyone's celebrating now the ceasefire. Okay, and of course back at home, people are very excited too, filling the streets, waving flags, that sort of thing. Okay? None of this, though, actually means peace has happened. Okay, you still have to negotiate some kind of settlement, okay, some kind of treaty, some way to put all this right, and we'll talk about that. I'll talk about it. You'll listen in the next file, which should be part 5, I believe.